May 1st, 2008, Lawrenceville, Georgia. 60-year-old Eva K. Wenal is found murdered inside her home. A witness provides a description of a suspicious man seen in the neighborhood around that time period. A newspaper soon receives an angry anonymous letter from someone who confesses to killing Kay because she wouldn't leave her husband. 2 years later, after Kay's husband passes away, his family goes through his belongings and finds photographs of a man resembling the suspect in Kay's murder. However, no one associated with the Wenals has any idea who this guy is. After that, the trail went cold. Hello everyone, and welcome to the latest Minisode of The Trail Went Cold. I'm your host Robin Warder, and today I am going to be looking at a mystery which has taken place within the last decade. As you've probably noticed, the majority of the cold cases I've covered on this podcast are a couple decades old, and the most recent of these cases took place in 2003. There's no particular reason for this, it's just kind of the way things have happened. But I figured I should finally do a mystery from more recent years, since there's a better chance of it being solved. So on this minisode, I will be covering the 2008 murder of a woman named Eva K. Wenal. A few weeks ago, I co-wrote a 2-part Halloween-themed article at crack.com titled, "The 11 Creepiest Unsolved Crimes No One Can Explain." This particular case was actually part of my original pitch to Cracked, but it didn't make the final cut, and wound up on the cutting room floor before the article was published. But it's a pretty fascinating mystery, so I figured I would give it some exposure here. But before we get started, just a brief reminder that The Trail Went Cold is a weekly podcast which alternates between our regular full-length episodes and 15 to 20-minute minisodes like this one, which cover smaller-scale cold cases that don't have as much material to explore. We deliver a new full-length episode or a new minisode every Wednesday. We're currently available for download on several platforms, including iTunes, Stitcher, and Google Play Music, so if you like this podcast, be sure to subscribe to it. The Trail Went Cold has its own PayPal account and a donate button on the website. If there's anyone out there who's feeling generous and wants to make a donation, we would greatly appreciate it, and we will give everyone who does this a shout-out on a future episode. We actually got some very generous donations this week from a pair of listeners named Neil and Sheldon, so thank you very much, guys. It's greatly appreciated. So with all this business out of the way, let's get this minisode started. Our story begins in 2008 in Lawrenceville, Georgia, a suburb of Atlanta. Our central figure is 60-year-old Eva K. Wenal, who goes by the name Kay, and lives with her 72-year-old husband, Hal Wenal, a millionaire real estate developer. They've both gone through previous marriages, but have been married to each other for nearly 16 years at this point. On May the 1st, Kay stops by Hal's office so they can have lunch together, before heading back to their upper-class suburban home. Sometime after 6 p.m., after not being able to reach his wife by phone all afternoon, Hal returns home and is treated to a horrific sight. Kay is now lying dead in a pool of blood on the kitchen floor. Her throat has been slashed and her face swollen, indicating that she had been punched in the face before her death. Hal immediately calls 911, but Kay is already dead by the time help arrives. There were no signs of any forced entry, which seemed to indicate that Kay willingly let her killer into the house. Investigators placed her likely time of death as sometime between 1 and 3 p.m. A bloody towel was found in the closet of Kay's bedroom, as the perpetrator probably used it to clean themselves up before they left. Even though there were a lot of valuables inside the home, nothing was stolen, so robbery did not appear to be the motive, and Kay was not sexually assaulted either. Investigators believe this was a crime of passion, but unfortunately, there was no physical evidence at the scene, such as footprints or fingerprints, to point to a particular suspect. Since Hal had an airtight alibi, he was cleared quickly by investigators, and he offered a $250,000 reward for the apprehension of his wife's killer. The only major lead was provided by an eyewitness, who who saw an unidentified man walking through the neighborhood near the Wenal home on 2 separate occasions, both before and after the murder. He was a white, clean-shaven male with graying-brown hair who wore wire-rimmed glasses. Since he did not match the description of any residents living in the neighborhood, a composite sketch was made of the suspect and circulated by police. 2.5 months after the murder, an angry anonymous letter was sent to one of the offices of the Atlanta Journal-Constitution. It was one of those letters where someone actually went to the trouble of cutting words and letters out of magazines and pasting them together to form sentences. If you look at photos of the letter online, it contains usages of profanity which are blurred out, so when I read out the text, I'm just going to use the phrase expletive deleted whenever profanity comes up. The letter read, "It turns out she was just a money-grubbing expletive deleted. I loved her. She said we could be together. She told me she hated her house and that fat, miserable, lying, expletive deleted husband. She said she loved me, but that was a lie too. I told her this would happen if she didn't keep her expletive deleted promises to me. Her expletive deleted family screwed everything up. Those white trash expletive deleted. His money was more important than our love. We could have been so happy together, but they expletive deleted everything up." When this letter was turned over to the police, they believed it was a genuine confession sent by the actual murder. This lent credence to the theory that Kay knew her killer and let him into the house. Investigators questioned Hal to ask if Kay ever had any extramarital affairs, but he claimed this wasn't true. If Kay had been involved with someone else, then Hal never knew about it. And everyone else who knew Kay denied any knowledge of her having an affair. So Kay either kept this affair very private, or there was no affair at all, and the killer developed an unhealthy obsession with her, which turned violent when he realized he could not have her. Sadly, in June 2010, Hal Wenal died of a heart attack, but this would lead to another surprising development in the case. After Hal's death, his family was going through his personal possessions and found a box containing old photographs. Some of these photos featured a man who bore a striking resemblance to the unidentified suspect seen in the neighborhood around the time of Kay's murder. He was a white, brown-haired male with a receding hairline, and he wore wire-rimmed glasses. In one of the photos, the man has a beard, but in others, he's clean-shaven. At least one of the photos was time-stamped from 1987. If you compare the photos with a composite sketch of the suspect, the sketch does seem to resemble what the man in the photos might look like 20 years later. While it's true that the man in the sketch appears to have more hair than the man in the photos, the way the sketch is drawn does give the impression that he might have been wearing a toupee or had hair plugs. In some of the photos, the man is standing alongside Hal and Kay, but here's the really weird part. None of their family or friends have any idea who this guy is. Since he was photographed with Hal and Kay, they obviously both knew him personally, and the fact that they held on to these photos for over 20 years does seem to indicate that this man had some sort of significance in their lives at one point. Yet everyone associated with the Wenals has drawn a complete blank on who this man could be. Anyway, all the photographs of the unidentified man, along with the composite sketch, have been released to the media and posted online, and investigators have asked the public to come forward if they recognize the suspect. But thus far, he has never been identified, and Eva Kay Wenal's murder remains unsolved. So I guess you could say, the trail went cold. Okay, for starters, I personally don't think there's any real doubt that the angry confession letter in this case is genuine and was sent by the actual killer. There are some little details in that letter which point to it being the real deal, such as the line, "She told me she hated her house." The house that the Wenals were living in at the time was actually a rental, and they were planning to move to a much fancier place, such as a penthouse or a mansion, sometime in the future. This just doesn't seem like a detail that a hoaxer would put in a letter, unless they had some sort of personal connection. The evidence definitely points to this being a crime of passion perpetrated by someone taking out their rage on Kay. Whether the killer was an obsessive stalker, or someone who was romantically involved with Kay, is unknown. But the thing that really makes this case stand out is the photo of the unidentified man found in Hal's possessions. I can't think of too many other murder cases where the victim had photos of their possible killer stashed away in their home. I suppose we have to acknowledge that this might be nothing more than a red herring. We still don't know for sure that the man seen in the neighborhood around the time of Kay's murder actually was her killer, so it could just be a coincidence that the Wenals have a photo of someone who resembles him. But the fact that no one can even identify this man is such an intriguing mystery. Now, I have to confess that I'm a little murky about the exact time Kay and Hal first met. I watched an America's Most Wanted segment about the case in which Kay's sister says that the couple were married in August of 1992, and I have no reason to doubt that's inaccurate. However, some articles I've read state the Wenals were married for 20 years, but I'm assuming that's an error. They probably meant that Kay and Hal were together for 20 years, though they didn't actually tie the knot until 1992. I do think this is an important detail since one of the photos of the suspect is time-stamped from 1987. I'd like to know if Kay and Hal were officially together that year and how far along they were in their relationship. I know the Wenals are pictured with the man in at least one of the photos, but I'm not sure it's the same time-stamped photo from 1987. Since the man has a beard in one photo and is clean-shaven in the others, these pictures were obviously taken at different intervals, but I don't know how far apart they are. Now, apparently, according to those who knew them, those photos would be from a time period when the Wenals were spending a lot of time in Las Vegas and California. They did not actually settle down in Georgia until the 1990s, so if the man in the photo is Kay's killer, then I wouldn't be surprised if he's not from Georgia and left the state following the murder. The Wenals previously lived in Arizona and California and spent a lot of time traveling the world, so I'm sure they crossed paths with a lot of people. And being a prominent real estate developer, Hal would have had a lot of business associates. It's also worth noting that Kay worked for Hal for a time period, so the relationship with the man in the photo could have been strictly business related. In the photo where the man is bearded, he's wearing a tuxedo. And in one of the photos where he's clean-shaven, he's speaking on a microphone alongside what appears to be an Asian man, who has also never been identified. Since this guy seems to have been photographed at public social events, there have to be people out there who would know who he is, but thus far, no one has come forward. Given how much the Wenals traveled, I guess it shouldn't be too unbelievable that none of their family or friends can identify the man. However, you probably might be thinking it's strange that Hal never mentioned these photos, even though they feature a man who bears a resemblance to the potential killer of his wife. Even though Hal was cleared as a suspect and his alibi confirms it would have been impossible for him to commit the crime himself, you may be considering the idea that Hal could have hired someone to murder his wife. But I think the chances of that are pretty non-existent. By all accounts, the Wenals had a very happy marriage, and Hal would have no motive to murder Kay, and nothing to gain from it. He seemed absolutely panicked and devastated when he found his wife's body, and police believed his emotional reaction was the kind of thing you just cannot fake. So I honestly think that when they released the composite sketch of the suspect, Hal just didn't put two and two together. Remember, those photos were 20 years old and had been buried in a box for a long time. I'm guessing that Hal just did not remember this man, or if he did, he never considered the possibility that he might be Kay's killer. Besides, I think most of us have probably gone through a similar situation where we stash old photographs away for a long period of time, and when we look at them years later, we sometimes struggle to remember who certain people in the pictures are. In Hal's case, even though he was photographed alongside this man, he might not have been of great significance to Hal's life in the long run. But whether or not this guy played a significant role in Kay's life is another story. Everyone in Kay's life, including her sister, whom she was very close to, has denied any knowledge of Kay having an affair. This does seem a bit strange, considering that the writer of the anonymous letter blames Kay's family for screwing everything up, but he never provided any context about what he meant. But if her family didn't know anything, that doesn't mean Kay couldn't have been having an affair without telling anyone. Remember, that would involve admitting that she had cheated on her husband, and it could do serious damage to her reputation, so I could see why she'd keep quiet about it. Even though Kay and Hal seemed to have a very happy marriage, I don't think an extramarital affair would have been entirely out of the question. At the time of the murder, Kay was pushing for Hal to retire because even though he was now in his 70s, he still seemed to be quite a workaholic who often worked 12 to 14-hour days. With that type of schedule, it's not inconceivable that Kay could have been carrying on a secret affair without her husband knowing. Of course, I don't want to perform character assassination on a murder victim and flat out state that she was having an affair, because I don't know that for sure. I think it's equally plausible that she was murdered by someone with an unhealthy obsession with her who just lost it because she kept spurning his advances. Based on the angry confession letter, I have no doubt that whoever killed Kay decided to murder her because he couldn't have her. If it's the same man in the photographs, then that's a pretty scary scenario because that would mean he knew her for about 20 years, and who knows what kind of obsession he could have built up during that time. Like I said earlier, it's possible the composite sketch and the photographs are nothing more than a red herring, but I kind of hope this unidentified man is the killer, because that means this case is still solvable. This is one of the great things about the internet and social media. You can look into this case and pull up the sketch and the photos at any time, so I think there's a good chance that someday the right person is going to see them and conclusively identify the suspect. So we're going to be posting the sketch and the photographs of the unidentified man on our website, so if you think you recognize him, please call the Gwinnett County Police tip line at 770-513-5480. That's 770-513-5480. Even if you don't recognize him, but have some other vital information which might help solve this case, please call the tip line and get in touch with the proper authorities. So that's about it for this minisode. Of course, if you have your own theory about what happened, feel free to leave me a comment or send me an email at robin.warder@icloud.com. That's robin.warder@icloud.com. I want to thank all my loyal listeners and supporters out there, especially those from the Unsolved Mysteries message board at the Sitcoms Online forum and the Unresolved Mysteries subreddit. A big thank you to Miguel Foote, who edits and assembles this podcast together for me, and is the managing editor of our website, The Back Row. And of course, a major shout out to Vince Nitro, who composes our creepy music score. If you haven't already, you can like us on Facebook, follow us on Twitter, or leave us a rating or a review on iTunes, Stitcher, or Google Play Music. And like I mentioned earlier, we also have a donate button on our website. So if you want to express your appreciation for all the hard work we put into this podcast, we'd be extremely grateful. You can also check out my true crime and mystery articles at crack.com and listverse.com, and there's plenty of other non-true crime content you can find right here at The Back Row. So have yourself a good week, and join me next Wednesday for a new full-length episode of The Trail Went Cold.